Next, we have Jonathan Ledgard, co-founder and CEO of Tihano Interspecies Money. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He's a pioneer in applying AI and blockchain to ecological and conservation finance. Jonathan invented the interspecies money concept, which seeks to build the digital infrastructure that would allow many species to participate in the human market economy. A leading thinker on risk, nature, and advanced technology, he also is an acclaimed novelist writing as GM Ledgard. His first novel, Giraffe, is a cult novel for animal rights activists, and his second, Submergence, was a New York Times Book of Year and adapted for Hollywood by Wim Wenders. In his talk today, AI and the distributed ledger for the survival of life on Earth, Mr. Ledgard will introduce a system where non-human species, key contributors to the global economy, but without capital, can hold wallets, express their interests through AI, and issue payments for verified conservation tasks. Please welcome Jonathan Ledgard.
This one. Shukran, Hamdan, and thank you very much for having us in your wonderful country. Okay, the title is very much over-egged. I think we can agree on that, but I think the important point here, we're really changing tack. So I think I'm trying to land a very conceptual idea in the real financial and computing environment. So you bear with me when we go at quite a high level, but essential point we start with is this is a very significant moment in time for our species. We are living beings. We live on the biosphere, with 8 million other species. We are incredibly fragile and short-lived species. And unless we acknowledge that fact, and unless we reorientate our computational power and our allocation of capital in a much more imaginative way, we are going to, at the very least, experience a lot of risk. Our thesis at Tihano is very simple, that other species don't hold money. Only one species on the planet holds money, that's humans. And we believe that is the main way in the economy of the world that humans indicate their interests. And that it's very hard, if you're not a human, to indicate those interests if you are not in any way allowed to participate in the economy. So this is a starting point of our thesis, and it's worth, a lot of our thinking. I used to work for The Economist newspaper. I was a senior correspondent for them. And so I think a lot about the financial industry and think about financial instruments. And there has to be a way of creating that pipeline. And what is very interesting in this project, when I go and talk to heads of central banks or heads of reinsurance companies, anyone who's stewarding money for a long period of time, they're actually much more in tune with this idea than maybe sort of enterprise people, because they understand the risks that are inherent in what is coming down the pipe. So just a very few questions to, we'll just go through them quickly. Obviously, the first two are fairly speculative, I would say. We obviously have biodiversity credits, we have carbon credits. Voluntary carbon credits have obviously collapsed. Biodiversity credits are very limited. What would those markets look like? If you had life-based financial instruments, how are they going to be organized? That's a big question. How big can they become? I believe they will be at least in tens, probably in the hundreds of billions of dollars within the next 10 years. Then, less speculatively, what will they require? What will the financial markets need to see in order for these new life-based financial instruments to spin up? And of course, finally, what is the point of them? Why are we even proposing this? I think the last point is the most obvious, which is, I'm 50 something. In my lifetime, any of us in the room who are 50 something, we've lost half of the wild animals on the planet, and the trend is downwards. And when we talk about wild animals and other free living life forms, of course we acknowledge the megafauna, the charismatic animals that we used to play with as kids, but really we're talking about species such as bats, insects, small mammals, old growth trees, which are the fabric of our life, of our economy and of our health. So the metrics are very, very clear that even excluding the dynamic of climate change, if you're not a human, you're in a very difficult situation. And where is this happening the most? Well, I'm based in Africa, and this project is obviously most relevant for poorer emerging economies. But most of the biodiversity on the planet is found between the tropics here. And it's not just found here, but it's found at the end of a road. So it's not found obviously in the cities or the towns, but it's found at the edge of villages. So you have dirt roads, and you have small communities where 80–90% of that community is living on what they grow. And then the surrounding ecosystem is harboring 70–80% of biodiversity on the planet. And those populations, crucially, are the populations on the planet which are human-wise, which are growing fastest. So essentially what we're asking is the poorest people on the planet to be the stewards of other species without anyone rewarding them for that. So I originally wrote, I was the director at the EPFL, which is the Swiss tech university, and I wrote a paper for the Brookings Institution in Washington, and that got picked up virally, and then we decided maybe we should actually try this in the real world. So we put together a team of AI scientists, economists, obviously biologists, and we did a deal with the government of Rwanda. So for the last 2 years, we've been working with the mountain gorilla, which has been an unbelievable privilege to spend time with these incredible animals. And we just wanted to see, is it possible to hold a digital identity as a wild animal, to attach a digital wallet to that identity, and to build a payment system, and in the middle, to determine what that payment system would be used for. Briefly, conscious of time, and Hamdan, you'll keep me on track. So, in principle, what we are proposing is a system, and we are thinking of this in terms of digital public infrastructure. So we would like to see, and Thomas and I were having dinner last night talking about internet protocols. So essentially what we're trying to think about is what would be the next generation internet protocols which would allow other species to represent themselves. What would be a protocol for identity? What would be a protocol for the data flow? What would be a protocol for payments? But in broad terms, you have the gorilla. We built a prototype platform. The platform is asking the agents, human agents in the community, can you provide some data or can you provide some simple services based on the interests? The agent provides that and receives a micropayment. The impact is determined and then verified, and what you would hope for over a 10-year period is that that system becomes kind of regenerative, and that those interests are actually improving and being refined over time. So obviously the data is a key thing. I'll come to the identity. What we realized on the blockchain side is you can put a lot of this information on the digital ledger, and a lot of that is quite enterprise-based. And what we would expect to see as this system matures is slightly different versions doing different things, but all are having some blockchain components. For the initial work that we pushed it into three categories: the AI inference model, determining interests, digital representation, digital ID, and then blockchain. For us, what we realize is that the identity is the most important foundational point. If you can't represent yourself in the system, it's very, very hard. But that's doesn't mean that we are talking necessarily about digital twins. You know, we had a lot of economists working in our group, including the Minister of Finance in Rwanda, and we settled on this idea of know your customer. So we've amended it to know your species. And we don't know what the financial market would require. But if you look in the crypto space, you know, whether you are a bored ape or whether you're a dog, there are representations of animals which are particularly sticky and attractive. What is important is that they all connect back. And for many species, it will be a collective identity. Let's say you're a bat colony. You will bound the colony of the bats, and that will be a collective identity. But for some species, particularly great apes, we're talking about individual identities. Here, we did some experiments with giraffes, and there are a lot of species where it's particularly easy to use AI to use pattern recognition on the body. But here, again, the same principle, just to reinforce, what you are trying to do is to create a system where the individual in a community is connected with the species. Quite literally, the species is paying her to make decisions or provide services which are useful for that particular species. One of the, I'm a visiting professor in AI, though I don't claim to be a research scientist, but we have a lot of AI teams in our group. And one of the most radical things that we discovered in this initial 2-year pilot was that we ran a blind track with primatologists, rangers, trackers, veterinarians, who are trying to determine the simple interests of a mountain gorilla. And then we built an AI model where we essentially scraped the entire human corpus of knowledge on this particular species, and we were able to see that even at this Sesame Street level of AI, which is what we have right now, the AI was at the human expert level. It was able to determine simple interests that the animals might have. And in one regard, it was more effective than the humans, which was that the mountain gorilla is a very large animal which didn't invent fire. That's my big takeaway from spending a lot of time with mountain gorillas, is that fire is actually pretty good invention, because they're having to eat 20, 30, 40 kilos of vegetation a day with more or less a human anatomy. So they have a lot of intestinal infections. And weirdly, the human track did not figure that the suffering of intestinal disorders as a very high interest that the animals might have, but the AI was indicating that actually they would like to see a lot more veterinary interventions, which is a long way around to say, and this is a very radical point, I think, that humans, and I say this respectfully, we are slightly autistic as a species. We find it very, very hard to actually dwell upon other life forms which have a very different way of being in the world. And we believe that over a period of time, it might be possible, whether it's Sandy's AI buddies or it's some other computational structure, but it might be that the AI is able to mediate the interests of the non-humans and explain those to humans better than humans have done to date. And I think that's a pretty exciting element. And anyone who's particularly interested in this point can just contact me and I'll connect them to some of our deeper work on this. For those of you who are in finance, obviously it's an ADIA lab connected with ADIA. I think it's really important that we're living in a very, very weird moment right now. Extremely weird and volatile moment where the physics of our atmosphere hasn't changed, the chemistry of our oceans hasn't changed, and the complexity of our biology hasn't changed, and yet we're living in utter denial of building regenerative tools which actually acknowledge that. But when you actually look at what financiers are saying, they very, very much want to put money into nature, but they want to do it in a verifiable way where the impact is measurable, and that's obviously what we are aiming for. And just to end up where we think, the wallets we think are something, as I say, is enterprise. Data is something which the larger community is going to have. But these things of the AI inference, digital representation, and this strange space here of interspecies governance. So if other species can express themselves in our system, if they are able to hold financial capital and spend it through new financial instruments, what are the new legal implications and ethical implications of that? So yeah, I just sped through that, but of course I'm very excited to evangelize further if anyone is interested.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Jonathan. I think we'll open the floor for one question.
I probably don't need them.
Yeah. For the live audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Super interesting talk. Seems quite futuristic in a way. And not to ask a glib question, but in terms of using AI to intermediate between what humans will think is right for a species and what species want for the species, how do you then balance interspecial interests? And this is probably a dumb example, but I imagine seals don't want killer whales in their waters. Could they spend money to get rid of killer whales? Like, is that... Yeah.
I mean, obviously you can game this out to a point where the complexity of a given ecosystem is going to lead to conflicts, and then you can also game it out to a point where a species has moved beyond its carrying capacity in a given ecosystem, as elephants have in some parts of Africa, But for most species that we've been targeting, which is in the low hundreds to the low thousands, these are species which are providing enormous economic benefits into the economy. For example, we're working with one fruit bat species called the straw-colored fruit bat, which is found from Senegal across to Saudi and down to Mozambique. And that one species is responsible for doing most of the seed dispersal in the Congo rainforest, which is our last carbon sink on the planet. If you were actually to take the most conservative actuary in the room, they would minimum price that service at tens of billions of dollars a year. Yet the conservation spend for that species is probably less than $1 million a year. So you're absolutely right that when you get complex interest in complex situations, I'm not sure this is going to work, but for the purposes of the next 30, 40 years of getting as many species through this narrow hourglass that we have, this is a fairly pragmatic foot in the door solution.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.